Okay, I think we are live. Welcome everybody to Bios and Bookmarks, powered by the NGC Bocas Lit Fest. I'm Anna Lucy Smith, and today our guest is Tracey Baptiste, the author of the very popular Jumbies series, which I love. One of my top recommendations when people ask me, what can get my preteen boy reading? I say, well, there's this amazing series. And it fits perfectly with this season's theme, which is crime and wonderment. As everybody listening can already know from the title, the Jumbies, we are dealing with a lot of wonder, fantastical, and a little bit monstrous. So, hi, Tracey. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Anna. Thanks for having me.
So, I would like to go straight into you reading from the book in a bit. And what I will say about Tracey is that she is a Trinidadian now living in the US, and the Jumbies is not her only series. It's probably what you're best known for here in Trinidad, for sure. But you have written Angel's Grace, which is a YA novel, as well as the New York Times best-selling book. Is it Minecraft: The Crash?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. And as well as many nonfiction books for young readers. A whole range of them actually introducing, in particular, what I like that you do is you introduce young readers to a diverse range of characters in your nonfiction. You know, a lot of people important to the history of the Caribbean and Black America. So I think that's important work that you're doing in your teaching and through your school tours as well. The Jumbies has 3 books and it's targeted towards middle grade readers, which in the Caribbean is not really a term we would understand. So I will say 8 to 12, 8 to 12 years old, upper primary, lower secondary. Yes, and it is a really engaging, wonderful series full of adventure and action. And as I said, a healthy dose of horror, which you would expect when you're dealing with Jumbies, right? So, Tracey, I'd love for you to read from the book. Give us a taste of your Jumbies. Are you going to read from book 1 for us?
Yes, so I'm going to read a little. I'm going to read a little of the first chapter. I might be able to actually get through the whole first chapter of book 1. So let us try. So here we go. It's a good cover, though, right? With the eyes.
It is.
So spooky. Let's see. So chapter 1 is called The Forest. Corinne Lemaire's heart beat like wild drums as she ran through the forest. Her bare feet stumbled over the dead leaves and protruding roots of the forest floor. She strained her eyes in the dappled sunlight to keep track of the small, furry agouti that scampered away from her. Occasionally, light glinted off the smooth rock tied to the animal's hind leg. It called to Corinne like a beacon. When she got close enough, she pounced on the agouti and missed, grabbing only a handful of dirt. Corinne grunted and threw the dirt aside. The animal ran beneath a bush and Corinne squeezed down to the damp earth to crawl after it. Her skirt got caught on branches, but she ripped it away, determined to reach the animal. On the other side, the creature cowered against a rock and the roots of a large tree. In her 11 years of life, Corinne had learned that with nowhere to run, a wild animal might try to attack. She hung back. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said in her calmest voice. She eased closer. "I just need that thing on your leg. You'll be able to run much faster without it, and I won't be chasing you. So." She moved with care toward the agouti and gently untied the silk cord. The animal's coarse fur shivered and its pulse beat as fast as her own. Corinne closed her fist firmly around the stone pendant and crawled back out of the bush. She rubbed the stone with her thumb. Over years of constant handling, she had worn a smooth groove that fit her finger perfectly. The pendant had been her mama's, and when she put her thumb into the little hollow, she imagined her mama's hand around her own. Corinne breathed a sigh of relief now that it was back in her possession, but her relief did not last long. She didn't know this part of the forest, and it was darker here. The branches of the mahogany trees were so thick that barely any light came through. It even smelled different, of wood and wet earth, while Corinne was used to the smell of the sea. She had no idea which way was out. Somewhere between the leaves, Corinne thought she saw a pair of lights shining. They were close together, like eyes. Her skin prickled, but then the lights disappeared, and Corinne tried to shake off her fear. The little bit of light must have been reflecting on something. "Don't be silly," she scolded herself. I'm going to kill those boys, she muttered into the heavy air. A pair of yellow-bellied birds alighted on a branch overhead and called out, "Kiskadi, kiskadi." Something small scratched through the undergrowth. A cold lump formed in Corinne's stomach and began to spread. She had heard grown-ups tell stories about the terrible things that lived in hidden pockets of the island, like this forest filled with ancient mahogany trees. They talked about creatures with backward feet, and women who could shed their skin, and women with hooves for feet. Even though her papa told her these stories were not true, there must have been a reason no one ever came this far into the forest. Corinne felt the wind at her left cheek. She followed it, as her papa had taught her to do. After a few minutes, the trees thinned out. There was a bit more sunlight filtering through the branches. Corinne breathed easier. Her heart slowed its pace, but she continued to hurry over the uneven ground, ducking beneath trees as she went. Then behind her, the bushes rustled. She turned just in time to see something move in the shadows. Surely it was only an animal, but what if it was another kind of thing entirely? The kind of thing from the grown-up stories. A jumbie. The hairs on her arms stood on end. She gripped her mama's necklace as she glanced behind her. From a curtain of shadow, two large yellow eyes blinked. Corinne turned and ran as fast as she could. The thing snarled and rushed after her. Corinne concentrated on the ground as she fled. She burst through the last line of trees onto the dirt road. A large pair of hands grabbed her. Corinne squeezed her eyes shut. "What are you running from, Corinne?" a familiar voice asked. She opened her eyes, relieved. "Nothing, Papa," she said. Her breath came in fast sips and her body shook. Pierre Lemaire looked into her eyes. "Why were you in there?" Corinne looked down the road near the dried-up well. Two boys in tattered, dirty clothing stood watching them. The older one was smiling with mischief. He held a small frog in his hands over the top of the well. It was struggling, but he held it firmly. Their next victim, Corinne thought. Corinne let the stone pendant dangle from her fingers. Its smooth surface gleamed. The smile slid off the boy's face. The younger one looked surprised, and then his face broke into a grin. His brother nudged him hard. "Those filthy boys tied Mama's necklace to a baby goatee and scared it into the forest. I had to get it back, didn't I?" "What boys?" Pierre looked around, but the boys had run away. "You actually chasing a goatee into the forest and caught it?" He looked at Corinne from head to foot and pulled some of the twigs and leaves from her braids. He laughed. "I've raised a hunter." He kissed both her cheeks, but then his face grew serious. "You should be old enough to know not to go running in the woods. There are wild animals in the bush, Corinne. There's a reason you don't see anyone else in there." Corinne looked back at the bushes and thought of those shining eyes and the thing that had run after her. Her father swept her up into a tight hug. "Your heart is going quicker than a riptide. Did something frighten you?" "It wasn't a jumbie, was it?" he teased. In her father's arms in the open air, Corinne laughed at her fear. She hugged him back and said, "No, Papa, of course not. Nothing frightens my girl, right?" He winked. Pierre wiped some mud off his daughter's face. "The sun is going down. It's time to go visit your mama. Are you ready?" Corinne retied the necklace around her neck and felt the stone settle close to her heart. Ready. Corinne and her father walked away as the sun slipped toward the horizon. They did not see the pair of yellow eyes that brought a dim light to the edge of the forest. The darker it got, the brighter the eyes became. The eyes watched Corinne and Pierre as they went on the road until they disappeared around a bend. And once the sun descended beneath the tops of the trees and the forest shadows lengthened along the road, the jumbie emerged. And that's chapter 1.
Thank you.
Sure.
So we know from that what we're dealing with. And we already have an amazing glimpse at Corinne's character. And I said to you earlier that I can't wait to read this book to my 4-year-old son when he's older, when he can handle the gore and the horror,
right,
which is completely age appropriate for 8 and above, but maybe not just yet, right?
Yeah.
And I think it will appeal so strongly to boys who love that adventure. But your protagonist is Corinne. She's a girl. Was this a deliberate choice for you to, in writing this book, to have the show led by a young girl?
Yes, for sure. So I really was very much thinking about my two kids when I started writing this book. I mean, they were very much younger, of course, when I started working on it, because it took me a really long time to figure it out. It was a writing process of 9 years from
Wow.
the time that I first had the idea to write it to the moment that it sold, because I didn't know how to write a story like this at all. And so I was really struggling to try to figure out the adventure element of it. And it just took me a long time. And of course, I was a young mom at the time. So I'm like raising kids, doing other things. So it's not like I worked on it constantly for 9 years. I would put it away for like a year or two at a time and then come back to it. But I really wanted it to have a girl at the center for my daughter, who is my older child. And she is somebody who can be very forceful and, very proactive in her approach to things. And my son, as I was working on it, like somewhere towards the end of working on it, my son said, I really want an adventure story. Like, it has to be an adventure story. So I made sure it was an adventure because that's what he wanted. So I was definitely thinking about the two of them and trying to balance their two sensibilities in the story and make something that appealed to the both of them when it was finished.
Yeah, and it works. It absolutely works. I can see this as something that a whole family can sit down and enjoy. Like, I would like to read it aloud, even to my kids when they're older, when they're a little bit past that stage of the read aloud book. This is something that I can see bringing back that enjoyment too, because there's so many moments that are just exciting, and just a little bit, there's the suspense that runs through the storyline. And the other thing that you do that I find so intriguing with this story is you are bringing to life Caribbean folklore. You stay very true to form and what we know and are familiar of with the characters from Trinidad. Dwen, Laja Bless, Laga, Hu, Papa Bois, Mamadillo, they all feature in this story. And you describe them in a way that we are familiar with, that we have grown up hearing. So you stay true to that, but then you do something very clever where you take the classic Western fairy tale and you completely reimagine that from a post-colonial lens. So you stay true to the Caribbean lore, but you flip the script for everything else. You take the kind of the Cinderella character storyline, but you pull that from the Haitian tale of the magic orange tree. And then you've done something that I love. I told you it's my favorite part of this series are your mermaids, who feature on the cover of book 2. So I would love for you to tell us about your mermaid, where that came from, and also why you chose to expand an already huge cast of folklore characters with your own inventions. This is not just a Caribbean folklore tale or drawn from that. There's so much more happening within the series.
Right. So with the second one, I actually have the cover here. It is my favorite cover of the three in the series, with Mama Jlo at the front, and then you see, like there are a couple of the mermaids that are there at the back. The whole thing was that, I was originally, this was only supposed to be one book. It was just supposed to be the Jumbies. And so I wrote this story where I wrote in a lot of the creatures that we are familiar with, but I also introduced this new creature, Severine, who is not really a traditional Jumbie. She was just somebody that I invented in order to sort of encapsulate all of the Jumbies together. And if I had known that it was going to be a 3-book series, I probably would have written her differently. But because I didn't know, I wrote her sort of as the sort of the head baddie. But then I was able to create her as the sort of the head baddie of the land Jumbies, and then Mama Jlo comes in as the head baddie of the water Jumbies. And the thing that I was thinking about with the second book in particular is that we have this Mama Jlo creature who is, very strong. She is one of the most powerful Jumbies that we have in our pantheon. And there is this very direct link to Mami Wata from from Ghana, from West Africa. And so I thought about how we got Mama Chlo. How did Mama Chlo as a creature, as a story, come to the Caribbean? And it made sense to me that she would have come from there when enslaved people were brought across. And then that's how I started thinking about how to incorporate the mermaids and then have them kind of tell that story about the Middle Passage. And you know, the thing is, we have a lot of mermaid stories in our, you know, in our culture, and those mermaid stories tend to focus on European mermaids, and you know, but we live on islands, so it does not make any kind of sense to me that there wouldn't be Caribbean mermaids, that there wouldn't be Black mermaids. And I thought that it would be the perfect thing to layer this kind of story on, because what an origin story they could have if we are then talking about the kinds of horrors that would have made mermaids that look like this come to the Americas, to the Caribbean and to the Americas. Like, what would that look like? And especially because mermaids are such beautiful creatures, the juxtaposition of the horror with the beautiful, it's like, for kids, it's like just enough distraction to make the bad parts of the story, the really difficult parts of the story, easier to come to. But that was very delicate work. It took me a very long time to figure it out, to sort of get it right. And for the second book, that actually was the hardest part of writing the second book, was getting that balance between the mermaids, the very beautiful mermaids and their personalities, and being able to tell this sort of middle story passage. That was absolutely the most difficult part in that book. And, you know, there were a lot of tears, like literal tears. So I was very, very pleased when I was able to crack it finally, and it came out okay.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And the travel that allows too in your story between the Caribbean and back to Ghana, and the mermaids come and the mermaids go, and the how you play with their memory loss and them re-embracing what was their origin story. It's a great way of introducing that discussion with this age group in a very delicate way, as you say. So it's that nugget without being too challenging for the age group, but still something that is so worthwhile to include. And it's something you do throughout the series. So you don't shy away at all from heavy issues and things that, I mean, I have told you before that I was mildly traumatized by the duendes in your book, when we have a little boy in book one who disappears with the duendes. And at the end of book one, I'm still there going, does nobody remember Alan? When is he going to come home? Look at it. His mother's grieving, and his mother is still grieving in book two. And this is something that's put forward there. You know, death is very present. You're dealing with monstrous creatures. The lines between good and evil are blurry in this series. You know, what it means to actually be an evil creature, because everybody is protecting some interest in the book. There's no real evil, but bad things do happen as a consequence of people's motivations, or creatures' motivations, I should say. And that must be challenging with this age group. You know, you're marketing this book to 8 to 12. You know, and here I am we're talking about the Middle Passage, and we're talking about children disappearing, about death, and about good and evil. So how do you master that balance, you know, and what for you, you said the mermaids were the most challenging, but what have you found the response to be from children when you have these issues included in a story, or parents even?
Yeah, it's funny. It's usually the adults that sort of have a little bit of a harder time with the kinds of concepts that I play with. In the first book, I really was talking about colonialism and indigenous culture, because you have this culture that the Jumbies, that were the inhabitants of the island before people came, and then people came and sort of took over and demonized them. And so that really is the story under the story in that first book. And I very briefly introduce the idea of slave ships coming to the island in the first one, but I didn't really talk about it very much. And when I got no pushback from that, when nobody seemed to bat an eye at it, was when I was like, well, we're really going for it in book 2. Like, we're really going there. And people really loved it. Like, I was kind of surprised actually at how much people enjoyed and appreciated the way that I was able to mix the folklore and the reality and make them sort of mesh together in that way. And, you know, as I said, it was not easy work for sure. It really took me a long time. The second book took me just under a year to write. And I was working on it fairly constantly, just like really going over it and over it and over it to make sure that there was good balance. And that's the thing that I think about too, that there are these moments that are really intense moments, but then they're shorter and I intersperse them with other things. There are other kinds of adventure things happening. There's a shark attack. There's somebody, you know, like pretending, ha ha ha, I'm gonna drown you. And they think it's funny and the other person doesn't. And so there's like this underwater sort of fight between characters because like, how dare you do this to me? Like, I could literally die. And she's like, no, you won't die. It's funny. It's funny. So yeah, I try to intersperse the things, the really more difficult concepts with those kinds of moments so that you're never living in one moment or one feeling for too long.
Right.
Because that makes it a lot easier for kids to be able to absorb it and move on. And the thing that I'm most trying to do, I think, is leave it with them so that they can think about it later. You know, so that, yes, there are all of these things going on. There's a lot of moving parts, but later on, after you've closed the book, you can think, huh, that was a really hard thing. Did this really happen to people? These are questions I want to ask a parent or a teacher or something like that, and then have a conversation with it on their own terms at that point. So it's just sort of like introducing little things to young readers so that they can, you know, then come back to it later on. I'm very much a teacher in that way, in which I'm always thinking about the long game. You know, like I don't expect that everybody will get all of the little references that I put into a single book, but I do expect that, you know, I'm like leaving these little seeds in there. And so that maybe later on, a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, whatever it is, somebody will think, oh, there's that thing. And I remember it from, you know, wherever, or I don't remember where I know it from, you know, but I, you know, I can now come to it in a different way. I'm more mature. I can like understand it in a different way. I can ask more questions about it, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and you do a lot of work on the school tour circuit, and well, you have your background as a teacher, but something else I find interesting about the series is how you incorporate multicultural elements. So this is not just a folklore story, and it's not just a horror. We've got that humor and all that, and you also have these delightful interludes, like we have an Indian wedding, we have moments of enjoying a pilau and food, and you know, references to pastel and things that make up a really full sense of what Trinidad society is. The names as well of your characters, we go from everything from Indian, Drupati as a main character, and then we have French, African, Chinese names as well, and characters all built within this world alongside folklore. And so it feels very reflective of what an ideal Trinidad society might be, where everything is harmonious, and you know, and you have that integration. And I wonder if are you very conscious of that in your writing? Are these intentional ways of presenting our society, or that type of society on an international level? Because your book has that international backing through your publisher, and you do a lot of school visits in the US. Do you feel that you represent Trinidad in any way? And are you conscious of doing that through your books?
Oh yeah, for sure. I feel like, I mean, honestly, you know, half my family is African descent and half my family is Indian descent. So there's no way I could get away with not integrating the cast of people that I have on an island. And then, I mean, like you look around, I mean, everybody's there. Everybody, you know, like everybody's there. So I have to put everybody in. And I think it was a surprise to American readers, you know, this idea that there are Indian people, there are Chinese people, you know, like they didn't really get that. And so I wanted to make sure that everybody in Trinidad was well represented in the books so that it's reflective of really who we are. And I know we sort of, you and I talked about this earlier, but I may as well do it now, which is that I don't mention specifically that it's Trinidad in the books. And the reason I did that, and that was also deliberate, was because I wanted the books to feel like they could belong to any island, that anybody from any Caribbean island could feel like this belonged to them. That, you know, I was trying to not be too specific in the research that I was doing about all of the various Jumbies throughout the Caribbean. Like there are slight differences in what Jumbies do and how they behave and what they look like and so on. And so I tried to go with the broadest definition that could catch most of what Jumbies look like across the islands. But of course, you know, when I'm writing it and when I'm thinking about it, I'm very much thinking about Trinidad in that. But I, you know, because I'm trying to make it for all of us, I really didn't want to be too specific because there's just not a lot of books that are like this that represent us in this way. And as you said, I was getting this opportunity to have this international platform with these books. And, you know, I'm going to put our best face on it. Like, you know, that's just this is how Gloria Hussein taught me growing up. She's like, people are watching. You make sure that you make us all look good. I'm like, well, yeah. So it is kind of an idealized Trinidadian society, but it's also kind of the Trinidad I grew up with when I was really little and still living in Trinidad. Like that's, it's not, I mean, I think maybe now it might look different, but when I was growing up, it absolutely looked like that, where everybody was just all together, you know, all we as one family kind of situation.
Yeah. And I mean, it comes across in the book. The other thing that is a little bit different is your choice of not setting a specific time where we are. So throughout the series, you get hints of what time period we may be in. This adds the sense of magical realism or sort of like the blurry lines between what is real, what is not. But was that also a deliberate choice then not to set this in a modern day Caribbean island? You know, Corinne's environment is so vividly described, you know, her fishing village on the coast with the forests behind her, the mountains. You know, you've got this, you've put a lot of detail into your setting, yet you never place it quite exactly in a time or an island or anything named specifically. So what was the rationale behind that for leaving the time frame blurry?
Yeah, well, I was thinking that with the Jumbies coming out, it probably made sense to have it sort of pre-electronic age, like before, you know, there was telephones and before there were wired lights in houses and things like that. I just felt like that was the right time for it. So when I was thinking about the time period, I was thinking about my grandmother as a little girl growing up, like what would, because that's when things really just started, right? When industry was just starting to come up. And I just figured that the Jumbies would probably do best in that kind of society without, you know, like the buzz of electricity and stuff like that in the air. That's probably the time that they would thrive. And so that's the kind of time period that I was thinking of, because I don't think it works as well with everybody with a cell phone and everybody with an iPad and everybody, you know what I mean? Like, it just does not have the same kind of feel. It's a completely different story once you add technology to it. So it was a way to focus on the Jumbies and to focus on the relationships, taking away all of the technology and setting it in a past period.
Yeah, I mean, everything is scarier by candlelight without a cell phone, and nobody putting it on selfie mode, kind of thing. Like, I mean, definitely it adds to the whole atmosphere of the story. And then it gives that, you know, the dress and all of that. I think it's intriguing as well for children to experience that. It adds a whole element of the unknown beyond the folklore. It's like, what is this world where people walk between their destinations? And, you know, everything is a little bit slower. So it is very intriguing and it adds beautifully to the atmosphere. I mean, you and I have discussed it before about your challenges with finding a home for the Jumbies. You know, it is a very diverse and very different book. And we have some questions coming in on Facebook as well. We have Ronaldo who says, hello from Trinidad. Quick question. Were you living in Trinidad when you became a New York Times bestselling author? And what does it take to accomplish such a feat? I mean, it truly sounds impressive, and it sounds sometimes unattainable to our writers here in Trinidad to break through to those sorts of lists. And what does it mean exactly, and how do you do it?
So I was living here because I moved to the United States when I was 15. So I have been living here for quite a long time, but I do as much as I can, of course. You know, pre-pandemic, I was, as much as I could, splitting my time between Trinidad and New Jersey, because I do like spending time in Trinidad, and I actually find that it is easier for me to write a lot of things when I'm in Trinidad as opposed to when I'm in New York and New Jersey. There's like certain things, like when I was writing, when I was working on Angel's Grace, there's like a part of it that's set in Maracas that I literally wrote in Maracas. I was like, okay, we're gonna go because I need to write this and I need to like be in the headspace, and it helps me a lot to be there and to do this kind of work. As for how I became a New York Times bestseller, luck. I mean, it really was just luck. I mean, I had written these books, and it was the Mojang people who are the owners of Minecraft. They liked them a lot, and they wanted an adventure story, and so they came to me and they asked me if I would write a Minecraft book, and I was like, absolutely, I will write actually, I didn't say that at first. At first I said, because I didn't really know Minecraft. I don't play video games. I get very nauseated when I play video games, so I don't really. And so I said no at first, and then my son, he was 10 at the time, and I said it at dinner. I was just like, oh, you know, like, we got a call from the Mojang people, and you know, they want me to do this Minecraft book, and I said no, and he was like, are you insane? Like, you have to call them back and tell them yes. Like, what are you doing? So I did, and he said he would help me, and he did. And then it really was just luck that the book did as well as it did. You know, and I think some of that was that it's a Minecraft book, you know, and it has like a built-in audience. But I also think that it was because it is very much an adventure book, like the kinds of books that I most like to write, and that has a really wide appeal. So yeah, it really was just me leaning into the kind of story that I like the best, and sort of leaning on my best abilities, my strongest capabilities as a writer, and then writing the heck out of that Minecraft story. And then you know, just luck that people really liked it. There was no trick to it. I promise you, if I knew that there was a trick to it, I would A, do it all the time, and B, I would tell all of you, because I would like to see more of us on the New York Times bestseller list for sure.
And do you think that coming out of the last year, We've seen a lot of attention on the lack of diversity in publishing. You know, way back we had campaigns like We Need Diverse Books come out from way back in like maybe 2013, 2014. You've been involved in some of those platforms. You've definitely thrown your weight behind getting more attention towards books that feature protagonists from different backgrounds, different colors. Do you feel like the opportunities are growing for writers from here on the periphery, from Trinidad? Like, do you see doors opening? What has come across your table that you think is positive, that could maybe be a support system for those of us here looking for those big breaks?
I think 100% that people are thinking more widely when they think about who is a storyteller and who can tell a story. I do think that change is coming slowly and sometimes a little bit too slowly for my taste. So right now, We Need Diverse Books is doing this program where Black creatives in particular can apply and be part of this program, where it's about mentorship. It's about the writing, the craft of writing, but then also the business of writing, like the marketing end of it, and those kinds of things. So I would go to We Need Diverse Books and see, you know, what it is that they have available, because this was just announced just last week. Another thing that was just announced is another group that I work with, which is called the Brown Bookshelf. And we are partnered with Highlights Foundation, and Highlights Foundation runs a lot of programs for children's lit creatives, for illustrators, for writers, from picture books all the way up to young adult. And so we've done this partnership with them where we have publishing houses coming in to do workshops on best practices in getting more diversity into the publishing houses themselves, from the kind of personnel that they hire, from the kind of approaches that they take to books. And those publishers are paying to come in and do this kind of work with the Highlights Foundation. And because they're paying, it means that Black creatives who want to come in and do work on their craft and on the business of publishing and whatnot can do this work for free. And it's a full year-round program. It's going to start next month. We have a kickoff on, I think it's either Wednesday or Thursday night. I'm just checking my calendar right now. It is Wednesday night. Wednesday night, I think it's 7 or 7:30 p.m. Eastern, which would be 8 or 8:30 p.m. Trinidad time. There is a free kickoff event, and you can go to highlightsfoundation.com and look up HF Gather. I will be there talking about the program and the kinds of things we will be doing. But we are super, super excited about it, because it really is the very first time that we're saying, let's put our money where our mouth is. You know, we've been talking and talking and talking and talking about diversity, but as you and I were talking about earlier, the CCBC numbers have not improved. And that's the Cooperative Children's Book Council that tracks who is writing what books are coming out, like, you know, like what ethnicities are writing books about themselves, what ethnicities are writing books about others. And those numbers are not getting any better. Like for in the case of Black creatives specifically, there are more people outside of the Black community writing books about Black children, which is a problem. And so, you know, that has not gotten any better in all of the years that WNDB's We Need Diverse Books has been working. The numbers still, they're like inching up, but it still hasn't really improved. So what the Brown Bookshelf is doing is a very targeted approach to say, okay, what can you do? What are the best practices? What can you do right now? And what can you plan for so that we have better outcomes as far as who is choosing books, who is marketing books, who is doing the design on books. You know, I am in a very fortunate position right now where my publisher, Algonquin, we're working on a book called African Icons. Comes out later this year. It's a nonfiction book about pre-colonial African history. And they went out of their way to hire a Black female designer for the book, a Black female illustrator for the book, making sure that they are bringing in people who can look at the book in a certain way, with a certain view that would make the book much more successful than maybe it would have if you don't have that lens that you're looking through. So there are ways to do it, even, you know, if your staff isn't as diversified. So I really very much encourage people to look out for those things. And you can feel like my DMs are open, like on Twitter and stuff like that. And I'm happy to field questions. I really am, because I really do want to see more Caribbean creatives coming into the kid lit industry. And I am 100% happy to field questions.
Yeah, that's an amazing offer. I think your inboxes might be blowing up.
That's okay.
And it's because sometimes you just need the advice from somebody who's been there and done that. And you didn't have the easiest road necessarily with the Jumbies. You've spoken on record before about losing one agent, finding another agent, trying to find the right home for this book, because not everybody understood it. Would you like to talk about that process at all, about actually finding an agent and how that got you to a publisher like Algonquin, who is giving you these opportunities? Clearly they understand what needs to be done, which is not the case with all publishers. And I'm excited to hear that you're getting those opportunities, that they're putting that focus and making sure that all the industry chips are in the right place. So it's not just about having a Black child on the cover of a book. It's
right.
about what's behind that, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think I am extremely fortunate with Algonquin. Algonquin has been really thoughtful about the work that we do together. It feels very collaborative. It feels very much like they 100% understand what the difficulties are and what the difficulties have been if you are a person who is creative and you are, you know, not white and not male, right? Because that really is the dominant culture in children's publishing.
Mm-hmm.
What happened with the first Jumbies book was, well, first of all, I didn't know how to write an adventure, right? Like I had written, my first novel, Angel's Grace, was a contemporary young adult novel. It was not, you know, it was nothing fantastic about it, nothing adventurous particularly about, I mean, there was some adventure because it's a mystery, but I really didn't know how to write this story. So I had to learn how to write this type of story. So it did take a while. And then when I showed it to my first agent, she sent it around to a couple of places. My first editor really wanted another contemporary story from me. So she, you know, she was like not ready for me to be writing fantasy. And so there were a couple of other people who saw it who felt like it was close, but not quite there. But then my agent didn't want to send it out again. And I knew that this was going to be the story for me. I knew that this story had legs. And like I had said before, like I would work on it and then put it away for a year or put it away for 2 years. And I would come back to it. And I kept coming back to it because I knew that there was something in the story that was going to resonate. So eventually I did part ways with that particular agent. And then I was able to find another agent, and she went straight to, Algonquin was one of the places she went straight to because she had just gone to, they have these sort of like pitch things at, oh gosh, now I can't remember what it's called, but they have it at the Javits Center at BookCon, where editors will talk about the kinds of books that they have coming out, and they will pitch the books that they have coming out to various people. And so my then agent went and she saw Elise Howard, my editor, talking about this other adventure book. And she knew that she had also done the Neil Gaiman book, not Coraline, it was the other one, the Graveyard Book. And so she felt that, it had the same kind of sensibility. And so she decided to pitch to Elise because she saw that Elise would be receptive to that. And she was. And I mean, it has been, like a whirlwind romance since then, honestly. Elise has been really great about making sure that I have all the things that I need to be able to do what I want to do. And she really pushes to make sure that I'm, like at the top of my game. Like you can't slack with Elise Howard. You really cannot. It's just no possibility. Every now and then I'm just like, I'll just like fix that later. She's like, no, I fix that now. It's that kind of relationship. So the process of getting there was long, and it was a little bit difficult, and it was hard to part with an agent because it's a scary process, because it's hard to get an agent in the first place. So to part with an agent is really frightening. But you also have to remember that as a creative, you kind of have to build your team. You have to build the right team for you, who's going to get you to where you need to go. And you need to also trust your own instincts about what it is you want and what you want to do. I have since parted ways with that agent as well. And so I'm now represented by Marietta Zacher, because I wanted somebody who really understood better, like somebody who I didn't have to explain diversity to then, right? And Marietta is a Puerto Rican woman, and she asks some of the questions that I would normally ask before I even get a chance to ask them, which is great because it takes the load off of me. I don't have to come in with the kinds of diversity questions that I normally would have to come in with. She's gotten that taken care of, and she's, and it also is nice to have a Caribbean woman on board, on the team, because
I joked earlier about how it must be nice to do an interview where you don't have to start off by explaining what Jumbies are.
Right.
I've seen interviews with you, Tracey, online with American editors saying, Jumbies, what a joyful word, but they eat you, and that's the starting point for those conversations. So you have to understand, that what you're projecting onto the international stage. That's the reality of it. A lot of the time you're going to have to explain yourself, but sometimes, every now and again, you just want a break, and you just want somebody who's going to get it straight off the bat. Yep. And your audience gets it. We have so many nice comments coming in for you here. People really think, you're speaking to them for sure. So Natasha Celestine Andrews says, it's our history and our reality, so it's never too early. This is when we were discussing introducing these heavy topics. It starts a conversation that they can later have with a parent, a teacher, a friend, which is so true. That's the value in these messages in your books. Jarain Prasad says, great idea to get them thinking about such topics. That's part of our history, and they should be knowledgeable about it. Introducing in these books might get them to explore these topics more later on, which we hope. Rihanna Can, thank you, Tracey, for the Jumbies series with all the folklore and fantasy. And I loved your earlier novel, Angel's Grace, also. Looking forward to your next project. So I know that you do have projects in the works. I wondered, normally at this point, we'd ask you to read again a little bit from one of the books. Maybe you want to read a short piece for us from one of the other books, and then we can chat about some of your other projects afterwards. So
yeah, sure. So I'm going to read a very tiny, I was going to read a little bit longer from here, but I'm seeing that we are getting close to closing time. So I will read a tiny bit from chapter 1 of Rise of the Jumbies. This one is called The Game. Corinne Lemaire dove through the waves. Streaks of light illuminated the gold sand beneath her and shone on a large pink shell half buried on the seafloor, just out of reach. She kicked her feet and pushed harder toward it. Just as she was about to make a grab, a huge wave crashed down, and a zillion salty bubbles and grains of sand blocked the shell from view. Corinne's lungs were bursting. She turned and swam to the surface. As soon as she came up, she spotted Buki and Malik closer to the shore. The grinning brothers had seawater dripping from their tightly coiled hair. They bounced up, and Corinne realized too late that they were preparing to dive beneath a wave. The water came down, rolling her onto the gritty sand. The boys had timed their dives perfectly to avoid being tumbled by the force of the crash. By the time Corinne surfaced again, they were gone. She took a deep breath and went under, fighting the urge to close her eyes against the stinging salt water so she wouldn't miss the prize. And there it was, the shining pink seashell. She kicked her feet and reached toward it, but just as she got close enough, a pair of dark hands snatched the shell out of reach. Buki, the older boy, grinned. A few bubbles escaped from between his teeth, and he pushed up toward the sun. "Eh-heh," he said when Corinne joined him over the waves. "Fine, Buki, you win," Corinne said. "Say it," he said. "Say it." Corinne rolled her eyes. But before she could finish, his little brother swam up behind and yanked the shell out of his hand. "Not King of the Sea," Corinne finished. "Looks like Malika's." Buki dove after his brother. Corinne swam for shore. They had been in the water for hours. Her fingers were wrinkly and her eyes burned. She dragged herself over to a coconut tree and sat against its curved trunk, sticking her legs straight out in the warm sand. Striped shadows from the coconut leaves danced on her skin and the ground in front of her. To her left, a group of little girls held hands around a lopsided sandcastle, danced in a circle and sang, "In a fine castle, do you hear my sissio?" The sand shivered. Corinne felt a tremor go straight through her body. The girls stopped dancing and the people on the beach stopped mid-action, but her papa and the other fishermen in their boats were still far out on the water, their nets dragging in the sea. None of them seemed to notice. She looked up at the sky. It was clear and quiet. "Where are the seagulls?" she wondered. The ground shook again. This time she got up. The group of girls ran to their parents and the adults looked around with wide eyes. "Earthquake," one of the women shouted. Corinne looked into the water again. There was no sign of the boys. So I'll stop there. So yeah, we're starting with adventure every time.
Oh, definitely, for sure. And the readers like it. It's what they want, and the children will love it. I just,
For sure.
Second book maybe is my favorite. I'm not gonna, no, I shouldn't play favorites. I mean, they're all good. But the second book I do have a special fondness for. You are working on many things at the moment. Tell us about the picture book, the upcoming picture book that you are going to introduce to Jumbies world.
I can actually show you the cover. Let's see. Oh wait, I can't screen share right now. So you have to enable it for me. And then yes, so the Jumbies picture book is coming out in September. And the reason that I have the Jumbies picture book is because a lot of tiny humans, there it is, a lot of very young siblings of kids who are reading the older Jumbies series would come up to me and say, can I have one of these for me? Because they really wanted to read it too, because I mean, you've seen the covers are very, very compelling. That's one of the things that Algonquin has done so well. They've made all of these covers so compelling. So I got a lot of requests from young readers, like 3 and 4-year-old guys who are just not ready for the older Jumbies books. And so it took me a little while to figure out how to make Jumbies not terrifying for the preschool set. But we came up with this idea of this character, Naya, who she goes out. She really wants to find a Jumbie. Like, she's heard these Jumbie stories and she wants to see for herself what Jumbies are like. So that one comes out in September. And then I also I'm working on a series right now with Rick Riordan for the Rick Riordan Presents series. And this one is actually going to focus on Moko Jumbies and Carnival. I really, really wanted to go there. Like, I haven't seen really any stories that focus on Carnival in that kind of way. Carnival as this platform for our stories. Carnival as this platform for the ways we show the world joy and just complete abandon and happiness. But it's also attached to this idea of Moko Jumbies, and Mokos in West Africa were healers. And so I had the idea of kind of meshing the idea of healing creatures with this wild abandon of carnival. And so I've just started working on it. It's going to come out next year in 2022, hopefully. That's assuming that I do a good job writing it.
And you will.
We hope. We hope. I always say that anytime I approach a new book, I'm learning how to write that book. So I never feel like I really have a handle on a book until I've gotten to the end of the draft of it, because I really am very much learning how to write this. So I'm always extremely nervous when I start, because I just don't know how it's going to work out. But in my head, I want it to feel like old Calypso. Like that's the thing that I have in my head right now as I'm approaching it. I want it to feel like, chalky and sparrow, and that's the feel that I'm going for. Even though this will be modern, this will be happening modern day.
And I mean, music plays a big part in the Jumbies series as well. To be honest, you incorporate that tune and everything from lullabies to, there are lyrics constantly throughout the books. And so that I can tell it's something that has shaped your work. Definitely that influence from Calypso storytelling, that oral tradition that we have in Trinidad. Mm-hmm. Are there any other books that you would consider from our canon as part of our 100 Caribbean Books That Made Us campaign? We're asking everybody, what are the books that made you? What do you consider to be those Caribbean books that have had an influence, maybe shaped you as a writer?
Oh yeah, I mean, I have a lot because I was in Trinidad, and I did, I spent a lot of my formative years in Trinidad in school. So Escape to Last Man Peak is actually one of the books that I remember vividly reading and discussing in a literature class. And is also one of those books I think that set me up for the kind of writer that I am, because it is very much an adventure story. And then of course we all read Miguel Street, right? There's no way to get away from reading Miguel Street if you grew up in Trinidad. It's just not possible. But it is extraordinary writing. And the relationships in the writing, the kind of dialogue that happens in that writing, I think is really quite extraordinary. But when I was older, there are two books in particular that influenced directly how I was writing, not just how I was growing up as a reader. I have one of them here, and it's Lynn Joseph's The Color of My Words. And she and I are actually friends now, which is great. But this book really was the one that got me to start thinking about how to write Angel's Grace. And how to approach it. And it's also like a slim volume, which is nice. And Angel's Grace is also, it's not a giant book, right? So I don't think there would have been an Angel's Grace without Lynn Joseph's The Color of My Words. Oh, wow. And then the other one was Derek Walcott's Omeros. I knew I had to write a story with a fishing village and a fisherman. And so that influence that's in the Jumbies comes directly from Derek Walcott. So those are the ones I think I would say.
And Derek Walcott appears in our 24 most mentioned books throughout that campaign. So a lot of people feel the same way you do. It shaped a lot of our interests as readers here in the region. And of course, he as an author has shaped what we know of as Caribbean literature. One of the defining names, definitely. And what about, I'm going to ask you one thing, and I wonder what you can say on it, because maybe it's too close to something that you can't say. But we have a comment on Facebook from JB Harper. Any plans to convert Jumbie into a Hollywood movie in the future?
I would love that, for sure. There's not a lot I can say about that. The thing is, I don't have a lot of control over whether or not an actual movie gets made. I can sell the rights, the movie rights, and then really it's a production company or a studio that makes the decision about what they will do with those rights. I would love to see a Jumbies movie for sure. I would, be jumping up and down on that. But yeah, there's not a huge amount. There's not a huge amount that I can really get into on that. But I will say that it's not really up to me whether or not that gets made or not. But fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed for sure. Let's hope. And as you know, we like to end, so we're coming up to our closing time. We like to end with a question. We're going to ask you, well, I'm going to ask you, would you read it, write it, or avoid it? So when Jumbies grow up, a darker, more foreboding series of horror and gore for adults, heavily based on Caribbean folklore, like the current Jumbies series, would you read it, write it, or avoid it?
I would write it. And the reason I'm going to say that I would write it is because I actually am writing it. So I'm actually working right now with a couple of television writers, and we are trying to pitch a Jumbies television series that would be for adults.
Okay.
So that is something that we are very actively working on at the moment. I think it'd be super fun. It will be sort of like, like Jumbies in their 20s. So you can sort of imagine the kind of shenanigans that might happen with something like that. So 100%, I would write that.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading it. And I have to say, as an adult reader of the Jumbies series, there are little nuggets throughout that I want to pull on and get more out. For example, the Papa Bois Mamadou relationship, or various little things in there that are just, they're very casually in there, but there's so much history to those relationships, as well as Corinne's mother's story, how she managed to end up, she is, spoiler alert, she is a Jumbie who marries a human fisherman and has Corinne, who is our lead character. That's not a huge spoiler because we find out fairly early in the first book, right? So I apologize to anybody who hasn't read it, but it's there early on. And these are things that I am sharing because I'm looking forward to hopefully reading these stories, or the bigger background. And maybe it's going to come out then soon. So
yes,
that's exciting.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
We'll see. We're definitely working on that, and we are hoping that it is something that happens fairly soon. So I'm super excited about it. I'm super excited about this idea of like bringing Jumbies into a wider world and into a television world. I think it would be amazing. So
are we talking kind of like CW Supernaturals style, or?
It's, well, that hasn't been nailed down yet. It definitely is not like anything. I think that what we're trying to develop is not really like anything we've actually seen before, because the fact is that Jumbies are their own kind of thing, and they don't really lend themselves to the kinds of stories and the kind of storytelling that we are already used to. So it kind of means breaking new ground on some ideas. And so that actually is the part that's really exciting for me, because just as a storyteller, I really, really enjoy like finding different ways to tell stories. Like, what is the way to tell the story of this particular character? It might not be the same as we've seen for other characters. So that's the fun part for me. So I don't think it'll be very much like a CW, like a Supernatural, or even like what's the one with, not Luther, the one with the vampire.
I know what you mean.
Like,
yes.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna. I feel like there have been people asking questions about like those kinds of references, and I don't think it's going to be like that, because Jumbies are very much their own thing, and so they need their own kind of platform.
I'm very happy to hear that, and you are leaving us with so much to look forward to from this conversation, as well as wisdom and advice for some of our writers who are aspiring to do what you have already done on this more international platform. Tracey, thank you so very much for your time, for all of that insider information. I'm looking forward to what's coming later this year. Everybody can look out for the Jumbies picture book, September 2021, as well as all these other things coming in the future. Thank you, Tracey. Thank you to all of our viewers of Bios and Bookmarks.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Anna.
Bye.
Bye, guys.